It's been 1 year, one hot mess of a year, but I want to say, having been through all that, are you feeling a little bit invincible?
No, quite the contrary. I think when you're in the middle of a pandemic, every single day is a battle, every single day is a challenge. And before we get into the nitty-gritty, Ben, can I thank everybody in this room, because some of the names you've mentioned, the people I'm looking at, have been absolutely instrumental in the success of New South Wales. It's not been government, it's actually been community and our business and other stakeholders who've really told us what they need, and we've tried to step up and meet those challenges. So I just wanted to thank everybody here for their efforts.
Well done. I think that's a theme that we've heard a lot today about a much stronger partnership than ever before between all the key stakeholders, not just government. It's not government separately, business separately, other leaders.
And I'd like to say in a biased way and an immodest way that even before COVID, we based what we did on collaboration. We knew that you can't be a successful government, you can't build stuff and get better services unless you have that collaboration between community, business and government and all non-government entities, and that's what we've strived to do. And COVID has accelerated our ability to do that. And I think a few people mentioned that we should come out of COVID different to when we went in. Well, can I tell you, our government's already different. We've already changed the way we do things. We're already changed in our outlook, changed in our level of confidence. I think we're more confident now because we've seen what we can achieve both on the national stage and globally. And touch wood, I don't want to jinx this, but I don't know any other jurisdiction on the planet that has our infection rates and our level of openness with the economy and lack of borders. So as a team, we're incredibly proud of that. But as I said, it's been a team effort across all of our stakeholders.
Yeah, brilliant. Now, as I mentioned, you've just come from National Cabinet. I imagine it would have been a lot of exchange of pleasantries with Ms. Palaszczuk. Can you just take us through that?
It's always pleasant. It's always pleasant. Look, the bottom line is that the PM's confident that all states bar WA have committed to open borders by Christmas. So that's
brilliant.
Yeah. So we're hoping that's the case.
That's great.
But as we say, when we made a decision about Victoria, I said to the team, I want to go out and announce it straight away to give people time to plan ahead, get business time to plan ahead, to allow people to have bookings for Christmas. So I hope to think the Queensland Premier's decision won't be at the 11th hour, but we'll give people time to prepare, because the other day I walked into a flight centre in Revesby and there were 3 brilliant staff working there with no customers, and they said as soon as the Queensland border comes down, we know we'll be full. And you think about that. You think about the jobs that could potentially be lost and the businesses that could go under if there's yet another summer where we don't have that tourism. Our regions in New South Wales are going great guns because of New South Wales residents are limited in where they can go. But if you want to talk medium long term in terms of our state's ability to grow our economy, we rely on the other states to buy our services and products, and likewise other states rely on us for our tourism. So the quicker the borders come down, the better. And can I say, for the last month, we've welcomed New Zealanders here without quarantine, even though when they go back they have to have quarantine. But that's working really well. It's a good case study for what we're capable of. But the only challenge we have is finding other jurisdictions that match our infection rates, because that obviously elevates the risk. Japan and South Korea are doing well, Singapore's doing well, but they're nowhere near where we are per head of population in terms of infection rates. So that's a calculated risk we'll have to take when we get there. Except Finland and Norway are okay, but I don't know how we'll go with trade issues with Finland and Norway.
Well, it's interesting you're at Flight Centre. I imagine that could potentially be an opportunity for Flight Centre. They're stuck up in Brisbane. I'm sure that Anastasia's... of course, it wasn't politically driven. Health-driven decisions not to open the borders has affected their business. Is this an opportune time to bring them here and really help their business?
Yeah, and Ben, I'm not just saying this, and I'm sure if the Treasurer was still here, he'd comment the same, but we've had a lot of interest from major corporates around Australia and around the world about wanting to set up shop here. And I think the one key thing we need to take out of COVID is the competitive advantage we're creating for ourselves as a jurisdiction. A lot of companies in Melbourne are really frustrated with the lockdown, and not just so much the concept of the lockdown, but what they're asked to do. I mean, to be asked to reduce your productivity by a certain percentage, I mean, what business operates on that? Whereas the question should have been asked, this is what we need you to do to keep safe. You tell us how you're going to do that. So I think that you have to ask business the right question. So there's a lot of frustration from companies based in Victoria, and similarly companies who are facing border restrictions in other states. So we know that people are looking at us, and we want to take this opportunity to encourage them to either set up shop here or else increase their footprint. Because one thing we know is if you provide business certainty and continuity, people want to invest and employ people.
I think everyone would acknowledge that New South Wales, more than perhaps any jurisdiction in the world, has navigated the path quite adroitly, very, very well, and recognising that we need to keep people working, we need to keep people living their lives, but at the same time keeping them safe. So I guess on a practical level, my question is, where's your mind at in terms of a big question in Sydney, and that is getting back to 2 square metres and really helping those establishments that are hemorrhaging? Yeah,
look, we know that's the next step in terms of where we go. We've already done 2 square metres for outside venues, so that is definitely the next step for us. I think what we want to do is also look at what's happening in southwestern Sydney at the moment. I mean, we're pretty sure we've got all the strains of the virus that perhaps were there undetected. We'll know in about 7 days to make sure we've captured all that. Plus, obviously, in a week's time, the Victorian border opens up. So that's a positive for business, but it's also a bit of a risk because Victoria hasn't been tested yet. And one of the panellists before made the point, Victoria's still got substantial restrictions, which New South Wales doesn't. And you can only really test your system and your contact tracing when your citizens are free, when business is operating. They're not there yet. So it's a bit of a risk. And Queensland and WA haven't had their systems tested because when you've got your borders up, and when you're not welcoming back, as we are, 3,000 citizens every single week through hotel quarantine. We've got 5,000 people in quarantine at any given time. The other states have a fraction of that. Melbourne's got none. So that all carries risk with it, but also opportunity. So the next move will be around that. We've already had lots of discussions about that. So for all of you in the room, we're trying to do that as soon as we can. But we have to do it in a safe way so we don't jeopardise any business continuity, and that's the key. When you're pushing all the time, the last thing you want to do is go backwards. And I made a promise to myself. The worst or most difficult decision we had to make was putting the state into lockdown, and I promised myself that we would do everything we could beyond that point to never go backwards, to always keep pushing forward. And that's why whenever we make a decision to let businesses operate more freely, that's it. We don't want to go backwards. They should know that that is the baseline for them. They can make modifications around that, but we're not going to go backwards. So we're close to that, Ben, I'll say, but there's just a couple of things we're waiting on before we can make that call.
Okay, good. Is that code for in about a week's time?
That's code for as soon as we can do it. And as I said, we wanted to open the Victorian border as soon as we could, and I think we've done that at the right time, like Monday week. Is pretty cool, and obviously beyond that point we'll be able to look at other things, but we're always looking at those opportunities. So the health experts, I'm not saying anything that we haven't already put on the record, but we've asked them to consider what we would need to do or where we'd need to be to have the 2 square metre rule indoors. So they're already onto it, so we're awaiting their advice.
I can tell you that the story which our readers probably welcomed most, apart from New South Wales defeating Queensland on Wednesday night, was the vaccine.
Yeah.
So, it's early days. But how's that shaping your thinking about how 2021 is going to unfold?
Yeah.
And also, of course, people look to you in terms of shaping their expectations. So where's your head at in terms of if we get the vaccine and it starts to roll out, apparently we're getting 5 million and then another 5 million. How does 2021 look to you at the moment?
Well, firstly, the health experts are quite positive and enthusiastic about a vaccine being available in the first half of next year, but it will be limited, and the federal government decides who has access to it. So in the first instance, I imagine it'll be health workers or aged care workers and people who are on the front line. But as a government, we have to operate on the basis that we won't have a vaccine. What is a COVID-safe way for us living? How can we keep pushing the borders, the boundaries, I should say? Because even though you have the vaccine available, it'll still only be limited to a certain proportion of the population. So our mindset as a government always has to be how much can we push to keep opening the economy, keep businesses operating, creating jobs and attracting jobs. So that's always our mindset. So until there's a vaccine for everybody, we've still got to be in the mindset of, well, what can we do to keep pushing for openness? The vaccine will help because once you have certain categories of the population taken care of, it does give you that further freedom to make more decisions. So we'll have a better idea, I reckon, in February, March next year. So I think between now and then, there'll be a direct plan to say, these are the number of doses, and different vaccines, depending on which one comes through first, have different ways of applying. So some of them require 2 doses, some require 1 every 6 months, so that will also determine how you plan.
I've often wondered, watching you go through your work this year, have you ever had chance to stop and pause and say, what have I learned as a leader and a premier about, having come through this, and are you better for it, and are we, Sydney, New South Wales, better for it? In other words, when we come out of this, are we going to be better for it? Are we going to be stronger?
Oh, I think 100%. And I don't know how my colleagues feel about it. We haven't really had a chance to talk to each other about it. But we've certainly managed to expedite processes, cut red tape, digitise, think about what is the best way to keep our citizens safe, healthy, but also, and mental health wise as well, in terms of jobs and employment and businesses going. So we've almost governed, when I always used to say to my colleagues, don't stress about anything unless it's life and death. But a pandemic is life and death. And when it's life and death, with all due respect, Ben, you tend to care less about what commentators might say, and you think to yourself, it's true. You think to yourself, what is the best decision to keep my citizens safe and to keep business going? And when you kind of govern freely, it does give you that level of confidence which you didn't have previously. So I kind of went into the zone that I didn't really care what people said about what I was doing or what the team was doing. It was about what is the best decision for us. And also, I think another learning for us was, don't be scared to do something that nobody else in the world has done. Don't be scared to take a decision which you think will work. And also that you learn from your mistakes, you learn from your stuff-ups, but you also learn from, back in February and March, when the National Cabinet was first meeting, it's fair to say, I won't use the word I wanted to use, but it's fair to say we didn't really know or understand what the virus was doing, and we didn't understand how resilient our health system was and how resilient we were as governments to be able to deal with it. So since that time, we've learned so much, and it's really important in a fast-moving pandemic to make sure that your government becomes more flexible and adaptable. Businesses are better at that, but as a government, I think we've learned to become more flexible and adaptable. And also, don't be afraid to change course, because things are evolving, you're learning more. So previously, I would have worried about being accused of backflipping or this or that, and I thought, I don't care. If you get advice which is evolving, you've got to take it. If you get advice which means you change the goalposts, so be it, because no one writes a rule book on a pandemic. And certainly I think we've grown in confidence as a government, and I think our citizens are better for it, because we appreciate more what quality of life means, but also using this opportunity to really assert ourselves as global leaders in balancing health and economic challenges.
Yeah, and I think people have been looking to the National Cabinet and hoping that there's as much collaboration as possible, and notwithstanding the most recent theatrics, on a mark out of 0 to 10, what mark would you give the National Cabinet in sharing learnings and collaborating and coming out on top of this as Australians?
Yeah. I actually think, compared to COAG, the National Cabinet has been a breath of fresh air, because the National Cabinet is essentially COAG without all the red tape. But I benefit from it, because you get advice from your Chief Medical Officer, and I feel we've got the best one in the nation, Dr. Chant. But the federal process has all the Chief Medical Officers giving you collective advice as well. So you do get that collective advice as well as the advice you get from New South Wales. But it does help to learn from the experience of other states. And what it also does is you think about where the federation's come after 100 years and where it's going. So when the federation came about in 1901, all the states were very similar in size and demographics and economy. We are a vastly different nation now. So it's always challenging. New South Wales, it's fair to say, is probably the most assertive in terms of how fast we want to move and what we want to do. But it's difficult, because every state and territory in the National Cabinet gets the same voice. So here's New South Wales with 8 million people, and then the ACT with 300,000 or 400,000, whatever they are. We get equal voice. And sometimes I have to wait my turn and come last to say something. The PM's very fair and he goes around the table. But the federation's an equaliser, whereas, let's face it, the nation isn't. States are at very different stages of growth and demographics and economy. And I think we need to balance those things. And I think the National Cabinet process is doing that. And because the PM's allowed the states quite a bit of freedom to do what they're doing, It's the downside for us is states have chosen to keep their borders going, but the upside for us is that we're able to push a bit faster than the other states as well.
So where will you be watching New South Wales win the Origin next week?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not allowed to go to Queensland, so I can't. I don't think I'd want to go under the current circumstances anyway, but I would, actually Parliament's sitting that night, so I'll probably be watching from Parliament House, which is what we normally do when Parliament's sitting.
Okay.